Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. President Donald Trump's nominee for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retired General Dan Caine, tells the Armed Services Committee he never wore a red MAGA hat, as the president himself said he did when they met in Iraq in 2018. Dan Caine also pledges to be above politics if he's confirmed. As President Trump is set to announce new comprehensive tariffs on Wednesday, the Senate plans a vote on a resolution from Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia to repeal the president's emergency declaration that has allowed his tariffs on Canadian goods. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, gives a marathon speech on the Senate floor all night and all day to emphasize his opposition to President Trump's policies. Senate Republican version of the budget resolution, the next step in budget reconciliation, which will allow the Republican tax and spending agenda to be able to pass with only Republican votes, looks a little different than the House Republican version. We'll talk about it with Wall Street Journal reporter Richard Rubin. Handful of House Republicans joined Democrats to vote down a House Republican leadership effort to block a vote on a resolution from a House Republican to allow proxy voting for members of Congress who are new parents. Speaker Mike Johnson then cancels the rest of the week's legislative business. First Lady Melania Trump speaks at the International Women of Courage Awards ceremony at the State Department, and JFK movie director Oliver Stone calls for reopening the investigation into the assassination of former President Kennedy at today's House Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets hearing. Story from Reuters: Donald Trump's pick to become the highest-ranking military officer sought to assure lawmakers on Tuesday that he would not be influenced by politics after being plucked from retirement and relative obscurity, stoking Democratic concerns he would become a yes man to the U.S. president. Trump shook up the Pentagon in February by firing Air Force General C.Q. Brown, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and naming retired Air Force Lieutenant General Dan "Raisin" Caine to succeed him. Trump also fired the chief of naval operations and the Pentagon's top military lawyers. As the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing opened, Caine was asked whether he had ever donned a Make America Great Again hat, which was worn by Trump supporters. That was from Reuters. That question came from many senators, including Jack Reed, Democrat of Rhode Island, the committee's ranking member.
Immediately following the announcement of your nomination, press stories started to circulate about comments President Trump made about you and your past relationship. And according to the reports, the president tells a story where he spoke to you while you were serving in Iraq on active duty, and you said that you loved him, and "I'll kill for you, sir." The president then said that you followed up these comments by putting on a Make America Great Again hat. General Caine, is any of this story true?
Senator, as I mentioned to the chairman, for 34 years I've upheld my oath of office and the responsibilities of my commission. I think I went back and listened to those tapes, and I think the president was actually talking about somebody else, and I've never worn any political merchandise or said anything to that effect.
Thank you. General Caine, during the consideration of your nomination, were you ever asked who you voted for in the last election or 2020 election?
Senator, I was not.
Are you aware of any presently serving service members or senior civilians in DOD being asked questions like this?
I'm not, Senator.
Do you agree that it's the utmost importance to keep the military apolitical and questions like this should not be asked?
I agree with you, yes, Senator.
And what steps you'll take to guard against the potential politicization?
Senator, I think the question was, what steps will I take to guard against politicalization? I think it starts with being a good example from the top and making sure that we are nonpartisan and apolitical and speaking the truth to power every day.
General Caine, do you believe there's any situation where it would be appropriate for you not to be consulted prior to a military operation?
Well, Senator, I'm not in the job yet, so I can't imagine any hypothetical situation where I would not be in the conversation, if that's what you're asking. You know, I believe the joint force, if confirmed, and even if I'm not in a job, the joint force has a responsibility to provide best options to the Secretary, the NSC, and the President. So I can't imagine a case where the joint force would not be in the conversation.
Retired Lieutenant General Dan Caine, nominated for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, questioned by Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island, ranking member on the Armed Services committee. Washington Post writes that Caine is a decorated F-16 combat pilot who served in leadership in multiple special operations commands and in some of the Pentagon's most classified programs, while Caine does not meet prerequisites for the job set out in the 1986 law, such as being a combatant commander or service chief. Lawmakers noted his decades of service, and those requirements can be waived by the president. Because he retired in December, Caine would need to be sworn back into active duty. That would take place after he is confirmed, and then he would be promoted to 4-star general, part of the reporting from the Washington Post. More from today's hearing, Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, questioning the general about military policy.
General, when you take this job, what's your number one concern?
Senator, right now, the number one concern is the passage of time and ensuring that the joint force is ready, properly armed with the right capabilities out at the tactical edge, properly globally integrated with the services themselves, with the other elements of the interagency, with our allies and partners, and with the private sector, and ready to go tonight. And that means their families are ready, they're properly trained and equipped. So we have much to do, Senator.
We all know that the machines that we build, the guns and the bullets that we have, everything at the disposal of the warfighter, but it's usually and is the people involved. Our recruiting has much improved in the last couple of months. What do you see your role as an advisor to the president in recruiting for all of our military?
Well, Senator, we don't have much of a military without the incredible 2.8 million members of the joint force that selflessly joined the service to do something more important than themselves. And, you know, to answer your question, if confirmed, I think it's an opportunity for me to be another voice of encouragement for those young men and women who have the capability and meet the standards to come into the service and do something that they will forever hold so high in their past history. The chance to serve this nation is a special privilege for those of us that have come into the cloth of our nation and served, and I hope that I'll be able to encourage others to do so.
At today's Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, questions from Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, to retired Lieutenant General Dan Caine, nominated for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, asked the nominee about senior national security officials using a group chat on the Signal app to discuss airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen. Texts were made public because a journalist was apparently inadvertently invited to the chat.
If you heard that a mission of the kind that was discussed on an unsecure platform, Signal, and you were in one of those planes about to launch on that mission against the Houthis, knowing what you do about the substance of that conversation, how would you feel?
Well, Senator, I stand by what I said before. I think we all can agree that we need to always protect the element of surprise.
And that element of surprise was very likely lost if there had been any intercept by one of our enemies or adversaries that could be conveyed to the Houthis, correct?
I mean, Senator, that's a little bit of a hypothetical question, but I am thankful, as always, that we protect our servicemen and women who are going into combat operations.
But there are a lot of pilots and other military men and women who are understandably angry about that call, correct?
Sure, I've not had anybody come to me and tell me that they're angry about it, so I can't comment on that.
Have you read reports about that reaction to the call?
I have not, Senator, no.
Would you agree that that kind of reliance on Signal for that kind of conversation should be avoided in the future?
Senator, I just know that I have always used the right system for the right kinds of communications. I don't know in particular, you know, what information was classified in what way on that Signal chat. I know that we must preserve the element of surprise.
That platform is not a hardened and secure platform.
That platform is encrypted, but not secure, I believe, in the definition of the term secure.
Dan Caine, retired lieutenant general, nominated for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at today's Senate Armed Services Committee hearing questioned by Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. You can find the full hearing at our video library, cspan.org. And Axios reports the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee sent letters on Tuesday to members of the Trump administration's Houthi airstrike signal group chat requesting they sit for a transcribed interview about the national security breach. The White House has remained defiant despite the bipartisan backlash and growing calls from members of both parties to investigate the breach. That was reporting from Axios. And this is Washington Today. From the Hill, President Trump on Tuesday bashed Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, over a resolution that would undercut the basis for tariffs on Canada and urged Republicans to vote against it. Kaine has put forward a resolution that would end an emergency declaration Trump declared to impose tariffs on Canada, citing the flow of fentanyl into the United States. Vote is expected on Wednesday in the Senate. Trump posted on Truth Social, "We're making progress to end this terrible fentanyl crisis, but Republicans in the Senate must vote to keep the national emergency in place so we can finish the job and end the scourge. By their weakness, the Democrats have allowed fentanyl to get out of hand. The Republicans and I have reversed that course strongly and quickly. Major additional progress is being made. Don't let the Democrats have a victory. It would be devastating for the Republican Party and, far more importantly, for the United States." The article continues, if Kaine's resolution garners enough Republican support to pass the Senate, it would still need to pass the GOP-led House. And that Trump has imposed 25% tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China on the grounds that those countries have not done enough to curb the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. Reporting from The Hill, Senator Caine spoke about this at a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building.
Tariffs are a tax. They're a tax on everyday people. And Canadian tariffs in particular, what will they end up taxing? They'll tax groceries and food products. They'll tax building supplies at a time when home prices are too high already. They will tax fertilizer to our farmers. About 80% of the potash that is used by our farmers for fertilizer comes from Canada. They will tax our national security industries. 35% of the aluminum and steel that go into the ships and subs that we build in this country come from Canada. We're already having a hard time producing ships and subs on time, on budget. This will make it worse. President Trump is saying that there's an emergency with Canada. Canada is a friend, not an adversary. Canada is a sovereign nation, not a 51st state. And while we always have challenges with friends, we have a mechanism that Donald Trump negotiated, the USMCA, that enables us to work through trade deals, and we don't need tariffs at all. The president has justified the imposition of these tariffs on, in my view, a made-up emergency. Fentanyl is a real emergency in this country. Let's be clear about that. Fentanyl is a real emergency. But as President Trump's national security advisor, Tulsi Gabbard, testified before Mark's Intel committee last week, the fentanyl emergency is from Mexico and China. It's not from Canada. She presented a threat assessment that had nothing about Canada as a threat, that had nothing about Canada as a fentanyl threat. 21,000 pounds of fentanyl interdicted from Mexico coming into the United States last year, a maximum of 43 pounds from Canada. They're actually digging into that number and finding it's probably dramatically less even than that. So why invent this emergency? The emergency is being invented to do the tariffs, to do the taxes on everyday Americans. Why? So they can use the tariff revenue to give a tax cut to billionaires.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, at a news conference with other Senate Democrats on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. A vote on his resolution expected on Wednesday. The White House put out notice that President Trump will be announcing a new round of tariffs on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern in the Rose Garden. The president is calling it Liberation Day. A reporter asked White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about this today at her news conference.
It's perceived by some that companies or countries, if they change their policies either before tomorrow or after tomorrow, can have the president alter what he's planning for that country or that sector. Is that a possibility? And if so, what factors the president consider in making those changes?
Well, the ultimate change for these companies in these countries, Mark, will happen when they decide to do business in the United States of America. And as I just laid out, they will face no tariffs at all if these companies choose to invest here in the United States and to move their production and their manufacturing here to the United States as well. As for tomorrow, the president will be addressing the decades of unfair trade practices that have ripped our country off and American workers off. It has hollowed out our middle class. It has destroyed our heartland, and the president is focused on reshifting our global economy to ensure that America is once again the manufacturing superpower of the world.
So if they do something today or later in the week that's a pledge for future activity, would that be good enough potentially to alter the policy?
Again, the president has been looking at the very unfair trade practices of the past. Certainly, the president is always up to take a phone call, always up for a good negotiation, but he is very much focused on fixing the wrongs of the past and ensuring that American workers have a fair shake.
So if someone calls after tomorrow and says, hey, I'm ready to make a change, he'd be open to that?
The president is always open to taking calls.
Okay.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at a news conference today in the White House briefing room. She was asked about a Washington Post article that reads, White House aides have drafted a proposal to impose tariffs of about 20% on most imports to the United States. Three people familiar with the matter said she would not confirm that figure, but said the president has made a decision about how big the tariffs will be, and we'll all find out in Wednesday's announcement. Tariffs, one of many issues that Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, citing as the reason for his marathon Senate floor speech that started 7 p.m. Eastern Monday night, went all night, through this morning and afternoon. It is now closing in on the record, which is 24 hours and 18 minutes. He'll hit that about 20 minutes after 7 p.m. Eastern. The record is held by the late Senator Strom Thurmond, Democrat at the time, South Carolina, in 1957, speaking against the Civil Rights Act. Senator Booker posted a video today that he had pre-recorded about what he was doing on the Senate floor.
So I'm recording this to post while I'm on the Senate floor. I know there's lots of platforms you can watch it if you want, but I wanted to say here that I'm on that floor and I'm going to be speaking about what Donald Trump is doing to our nation. And now with this tariff, we are going to see more reckless steps taken that are going to raise more prices for Americans and cost our economy even more. So many things that I'll be detailing in this speech. And so it's my plan to continue to go for as long as I possibly can. We saved healthcare last time, not because somehow our persuasive abilities as senators got John McCain to change his mind. It was the voice of citizens. I think we have the power. No, I know we have the power. I believe the power of the people is greater than the people in power. So I hope to use my voice to do what people are calling on me to do. And I hope I can inspire or engage or activate more people like you can to use their voice, because I know we can stop what's happening in our country.
Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, posting that video to accompany his Senate floor speech. He's been speaking all night since 7 p.m. Eastern Monday, yielding often for questions to other Senate Democrats, never yielding the floor entirely. This is not considered a filibuster because he's not attempting to stall or block legislation, just talking about issues that are important to him. From the Wall Street Journal, Senate Republicans torn over how much to reduce spending while cutting taxes have an emerging strategy. Advance the ball now and figure out the hard parts later. The Senate could vote as soon as this week on a fiscal framework for President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill that would extend expiring tax cuts, implement his campaign trail tax cut promises, and boost funding for border security and national defense. That was from the Wall Street Journal. In a moment, we will talk to the reporter who wrote that article. But first, the Senate leaders on the budget reconciliation process. First up, John Thune, the majority leader, Republican from South Dakota.
We are hopeful that this week we can get a budget resolution on the floor that will unlock the process that will enable us to achieve and to reach those goals. And so we are continuing to move forward with that. And of course, we expect the Democrats to resist us at every turn. But unfortunately for them, when they talk about fighting and fighting and fighting, what they are fighting obviously against, and or for, I should say, is a $4.5 trillion tax increase on the American people at the end of the year. That's what's at stake in this discussion. And what that means, if you put it into kind of just everyday terms, there are literally those who make less than $400,000 a year. There would be a $2.6 trillion tax increase on those wage earners and a $600 billion tax increase on small businesses. That's what's in stake in this conversation. So say, for example, if you're a working family in this country with kids, if we don't extend the existing tax relief by the end of this year, then you will see the child tax credit go from a $2,000 child tax credit to a $1,000 child tax credit. So every family in this country who has children would face per child a $1,000 tax increase. And if you look at the standard deduction, now 91% of the people in this country claim the standard deduction. Well, if we don't take action by the end of this year to extend the existing tax policy, you would see that standard deduction cut almost in half. So from about $30,000 to about half that, again, hitting middle-income families. That's what we are talking about, and that's what we are doing in this process, is working on an agenda that will be good for the American people, will bring down the cost of energy, that will allow them to keep more of what they earn, that will keep the country safe and secure for future generations, and make sure that our southern border is secure. And so all the associated problems that we've had for the past 4 years in the Biden administration are done away with. This president has made huge progress on that front already. We want to be good partners in working with him to achieve these objectives on behalf of the American people.
Senator John Thune, the majority leader, Republican from South Dakota, opening up a news conference on Capitol Hill. One reporter asked him about a sticking point when it comes to accounting.
Yeah, if the parliamentarian rules that you cannot use current policy baseline as core reconciliation, will you accept that decision?
Well, we are in conversations, as you know, with the parliamentarian about the best way to get budget reconciliation we're trying to accomplish across the finish line. But we think the law is very clear. And ultimately, the Budget Committee chairman makes that determination. But obviously, we are consulting regularly with the parliamentarian on the best way to achieve the desired outcome here in the end, and that is to pass a reconciliation bill that accomplishes all the objectives that my colleagues have alluded to.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune speaking to reporters. The Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer also spoke to reporters about budget reconciliation.
On the upcoming budget resolution and the next vote-a-rama, what can we expect from Democrats in terms of strategy, amendments, or otherwise?
Yes, we have had many good discussions, including today, and you are going to find us focused relentlessly on what the Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the Republican Senate and House are doing to the American people. They are taking away benefits that they desperately need. Medicaid, going after Social Security, tariffs, as we talked about, that raise their costs, and many other things, all to give tax breaks for the billionaires. The American people hate that. The American people know that we're on their side. Trump isn't, and we are unified in that approach. Yes.
Would you prefer to work with Republicans on raising the debt ceiling, or do you think they should keep that in the budget resolution so they have to pass it?
Well, that'll be up to them. We're having discussions on the budget resolution in our caucus.
Leader Schumer, Republicans are saying that using a current policy baseline is pretty much up to the chairman, Chairman Graham. It's settled. They're suggesting that the parliamentarian doesn't even have a ruling to make here. Do you get the sense that they're trying to bypass the parliamentarian on this question?
That would be going nuclear, and it shows that Republicans are so hell-bent on giving these tax breaks to the billionaires that they're willing to break any rules, norms, and things they promised they wouldn't do.
Joining us now to talk about the budget reconciliation process in the Senate is Richard Rubin, Wall Street Journal tax policy reporter. Thank you for being with us. You are reporting that Senate Republicans are taking a different approach to spending cuts than House Republicans. How so?
So House Republicans locked in spending cuts in their budget resolution. They said you've got to get at least $1.5 trillion over a decade, and ideally $2 trillion or more in order to get all the tax cuts they want. They yoked together those spending cuts and tax cuts. The Senate approach is going to be put a bunch of tax cuts in there, assume those will happen, and then have maximum flexibility, as they call it, on spending cuts, to set relatively low floors for spending cuts, aim to exceed them and meet the House's totals when they get to the eventual bill. But this phase now, the budget resolution phase, the Senate plan is to not really have significant spending cuts locked in.
Senate Republicans are taking this approach because that's what they think they can get through. But on the House side, there's a very small vote margin. Is there going to be a problem?
Yeah, there may well be a problem, right? So where we are now is the House passed its budget resolution. It's sending it back to the Senate. The Senate is likely to vote maybe even as soon as this end of this week or this weekend on its version of that. But then that is going to have to go back to the House because both chambers have to vote for the same budget resolution to unlock the reconciliation fast-track process. And so the House basically has to accept what the Senate is doing. And it's not clear yet that the House is going to do that. House members who are, really fought over the language in their budget resolution to ensure that those spending cuts would happen don't necessarily trust that a very flexible version of the Senate that they're going to follow through in the end.
When it comes to tax cuts, there's something called current policy baseline. You say there's a fight going on. What is that?
So the current policy baseline is a question about whether you assume that tax cuts expire as scheduled or not. Under current law, the way things are, there's a bunch of tax cuts that lapse at the end of this year. And so if you extend them, they've been in place for 8 years. If you extend them, does that count as a deficit increase, as a cost, which is what the House budget and Democrats say, or does it count as really cost-free because it's just continuing the way things are, continuing the current policy? That's the Senate Republican argument, something that they're going to try to embed in their budget resolution. And essentially, it does two things. One is it sort of hand waves away almost $4 trillion in tax cuts. The other thing that it does is under the reconciliation rules, it makes it much easier to make those tax cuts permanent, and that's really been a key goal of Senate Republicans and of House Republicans and President Trump as well.
Is there any historical basis that the parliamentarian would rule one way or another on that?
No, it's not really been tested in this reconciliation environment, and so at this phase, we don't even know if we'll get a parliamentarian ruling, if they'll fight it out on the floor. Like, the exact procedures are to be determined. It's a tune into C-SPAN 2 kind of weekend.
Do we know what else is in the Senate budget resolution that may be a little bit different from the House when it comes to the other elements, energy, border, military?
Yeah, they're likely to have maybe a little bit more money for the border and military or allow for a little bit more than the House budget did. They also may increase the debt limit number from $4 trillion to $5 trillion from where the House was. Those are relatively minor. The big fights are, the big question is on the current policy baseline, and then the big fight is really about how locked in those spending cuts are. And we haven't seen a Senate version yet. At some point, the Senate Republicans will put out this new budget resolution, and we'll get a sense of where they're landing. And there are still a number of things that they're working on and a number of things that we just haven't seen yet.
We're talking with Richard Rubin from the Wall Street Journal. The process in the Senate is to allow amendments unlimited on virtually anything. Do we have a sense of what the topics might be as we get to the end of the week?
I mean, so typically the way this works is Senate Republicans would aim to have 50 votes pretty set for whatever they're putting forward and then fight off all Democratic amendments. So I would expect Democrats to focus on the things that they've been talking about with their amendments. So they would focus on trying to prevent tax cuts for high-income households and corporations, trying to prevent Medicaid cuts, those kinds of things that are sort of core to their message. We saw them do it in the first budget vote-a-rama on the skinny budget that the Senate did a couple of months ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if they head right back in those directions in that vote-a-rama process this time, and then again there'll be yet another vote-a-rama on the eventual reconciliation bill.
Budget reconciliation is a long and complicated process. Whenever you hear questions posed to, especially the Republicans in the House and the Senate, they talk about, looking at the big picture. They're trying to get their agenda through and President Trump's agenda through. So where are we in that process? Are they on that track?
I mean, they are on the track, but it is continue the metaphor, a twisty-turny track. It is not a linear track. They've got very slim majorities in both chambers. They've got a lot of things they want to do, and they've got a lot of issues in here that divide Republicans. And that's, I think, where it's going, where they're sort of delaying some of those fights by having different instructions for the House and the Senate, different spending cut floors. They're delaying some of the fights that will make this process challenging down the road. For example, they're going to have to fight about the size and scope of changes to Medicaid. They're going to have the same thing on the SNAP food stamps program, on the state and local tax deduction, on clean energy tax credits, on the child tax credit. There's just a number of things where either within the Senate or between House and Senate Republicans or within House Republicans, there's just real substantive differences, and they've got to work through those in order to be united and ultimately pass something into law.
Richard Rubin, tax policy reporter for the Wall Street Journal. You can find him on X at Richard Rubin, DC. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 11, NASDAQ up 150, S&P up 21. Washington today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A group of House Republicans rebelled against GOP leaders on Tuesday, writes The Hill, over their effort to block a vote on allowing proxy voting for new parents, thwarting other party priorities in the process and dealing an embarrassing blow to Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana. The revolt escalated the battle over proxy voting into a full-blown legislative war, as Republicans grapple with arguments over constitutionality, supporting families, and how much power GOP leaders have over the House floor in the historically slim majority. 9 Republicans, led by Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, joined with all Democrats in voting against the procedural rule, enough opposition for it to fall short in a 206 to 222 vote. The failed vote allows Luna to force action on her bill, but prevents the chamber from debating and voting on 2 unrelated measures. Democrats applauded when the vote closed. That was from The Hill. Congresswoman Luna spoke on the House floor before that vote.
As many of you might know, for over 2 years now, I've been championing the cause to allow new female members of Congress the right to vote. Some of the American people might be surprised that if you are a female member and you have a child, that you can't vote, which means that you can't execute your constitutional authority. For almost 2 years now in this cause, I've met with leadership and I've exhausted all tools in my legislative toolkit to be able to bring this to the floor. As I was met with much opposition, I finally used the last tool that I had at my disposal, which was something known as a discharge petition, where I collected 218 signatures and expanded the ability to vote while recovering from childbirth, not just to mothers, but also to young fathers in our governing body. Now leadership, because of the fact that they don't like that I was successful at this, is now trying to change the rules. But I want to talk about how fundamentally dangerous this rule change is. As of right now, they've slipped language into this rule, and we'll get to what they attached the rule to in a second, that would permanently kill any ability for new members of Congress to be able to bring this up and allow those members, if they just had a child, to be able to vote. That's dangerous because of the fact that, A, not only, if I'm arguing this from a Republican standpoint, that we have a very slim majority, but also to think about the message that that sends allowing female members to be able to vote. In addition to that, I'd also like to add that for a while we've had the majority and we've had the ability to bring legislation to the floor on election integrity and also to call out rogue judges. And yet they chose at this point in time to tie this discharge petition killer to this rule that would also permanently paint me and the members supporting it. And I would like to also share that I'm one of the most conservative members of this body. I'd like to hold up my voting record to anyone else as not just being anti-election integrity, but also enabling a position that I don't typically agree with. That in itself, I would say in this entire process has been the most disappointing, especially from among my party. But I would also ask my colleagues to remember, up until 1916, female representation was not a common thing in Washington, D.C.
I will use the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
I urge all of my colleagues to give this a fair shot, vote no against the rule, allow this to come to the floor so that we can address it for the first time, I'd say, in congressional history, and do the right thing. If we don't do the right thing now, it'll never be done. Thank you. I yield my time.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican of Florida, on the House floor. During the debate, Congresswoman Brittany Peterson, Democrat of Colorado, spoke holding her baby son, Sam. After the vote on the combined rule was defeated, Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, spoke to reporters about proxy voting and the rest of the week's schedule.
Well, it's a very disappointing result on the floor there. A handful of Republicans joined with all the Democrats to take down a rule. That's rarely done. It's very unfortunate in this case. 96% of House Republicans voted against proxy voting because they believe it's unconstitutional and they agree that it would open a Pandora's box. And so that's what we just saw. Let me just make this clear. That rule being brought down means that we can't have any further action on the floor this week. That means we will not be voting on the SAVE Act for election integrity. We will not be voting on the rogue judges who are attacking President Trump's agenda. We will not be taking down these terrible Biden policies with the CRA votes. All that was just wiped off the table. It's very unfortunate. We'll regroup and come back, and we'll have to do this again.
Mr. Speaker, were you asking for too much?
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, speaking to reporters after today's vote. The House Majority Leader, Steve Scalise, Republican also from Louisiana, spoke to reporters as well, walking and talking, and this was posted by CNN's Manu Raju.
Two more members tomorrow, and members ultimately, have to make some decisions about whether they're going to delay the Trump agenda or not.
Why extend the House hold? Why not extend it this week?
Well, because the rule failed.
So why not just drop it? I mean, just give a concede on this. We're not going to win on this.
The whole idea of proxy voting is the concern. It's not only the constitutional issues. It's the fact that it's not going to end there. You'll basically go to proxy voting for everything. And other members have admitted that. They said they've got bills ready to go to expand it even further, and then you've got pure proxy voting. And we saw that when Pelosi created that rule, and the abuses that happened were well documented and widespread. That's another.
How's the budget looking?
Question to the House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, posted by CNN's Manu Raju. The 9 House Republicans who voted no against the rule today that would have blocked Congresswoman Luna's proxy voting for new parents' discharge petition were Burchett, Kiley, LaLota, Lawler, Luna, McKenzie, Miller of Ohio, Stubbe, and Van Drew. Story from CBS News. The Trump administration admitted in a court filing Monday that administrative error and an oversight resulted in a Salvadoran man's deportation and imprisonment in a supermax prison in El Salvador, despite a legal order prohibiting his removal there. Acting Immigration and Customs Enforcement Field Office Director Robert Cerna said that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was removed from the U.S. on March 15th as part of a series of deportation flights that sent hundreds of alleged gang members to a notorious prison in El Salvador, even though an immigration judge had granted him a legal protection from deportation. Those flights were at the center of a court battle between the Justice Department and U.S. District Court Judge James Boasberg, who blocked further deportations of alleged Tren de Aragua gang members under the Trump administration's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Reporting from CBS News, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt asked about it today during her news conference.
The administration has expressed a complete confidence in how all the deportation flights to El Salvador were conducted. But now that the administration has conceded that there was an error of one Salvadoran national, will there be any reviews conducted? And does the president express any thoughts on the one error that was disclosed in court last night?
Well, first of all, the error that you are referring to was a clerical error. It was an administrative error. The administration maintains the position that this individual who was deported to El Salvador and will not be returning to our country was a member of the brutal and vicious MS-13 gang. That is fact number one. Fact number two, we also have credible intelligence proving that this individual was involved in human trafficking. And fact number three, this individual was a member, actually a leader of the brutal MS-13 gang, which this president has designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Fact number four is that foreign terrorists do not have legal protections in the United States of America anymore, and it is within the president's executive authority and power to deport these heinous individuals from American communities. It is a promise he campaigned on. It is a promise he is keeping, and every single person in this room should be grateful for that, considering especially MS-13 is very prevalent and prominent here in the District of of Columbia, in Maryland, and in Virginia, and the President, the Attorney General, everyone who has been involved in these operations is focused on eradicating these criminals and terrorists from our communities.
The Vice President said he was a convicted member of MS-13. What evidence is there to back that up?
There's a lot of evidence, and the Department of Homeland Security and ICE have that evidence, and I saw it this morning.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at her news conference today. From Associated Press, a federal judge on Monday paused plans by the Trump administration to end temporary legal protections for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans a week before they were scheduled to expire. The order by U.S. Judge Edward Chen in San Francisco is relief for 350,000 Venezuelans whose temporary protected status was set to expire April 7th after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem reversed protections granted by the Biden administration. That was from AP. First Lady Melania Trump spoke today at the annual International Women of Courage Awards at the State Department in Washington. Fox News reports that recipients include women from Burkina Faso in West Africa, Israel, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, South Sudan, Sri Lanka, and Yemen, and one of the recipients was taken hostage by Hamas in Israel during the October 7th, 2023 attack and is now an advocate for the hostages that remain under Hamas control. That was from Fox News, his First Lady Melania Trump.
Throughout my life, I have harnessed the power of love as a source of strength during challenging times. Love has inspired me to embrace forgiveness, nurture empathy, and exhibit bravery in the face of unforeseen obstacles. Today, we celebrate courage, a strength that is based in love. This truth is illustrated through our honorees, who prove that love can inspire extraordinary valor, even in the face of vulnerability. Their remarkable stories, a testament to the power of love in practice for family, community, and our world. This is especially evident in places where their passion defies convention and where it has been shown at great personal risk of stigma, persecution, or harm. The courageous Georgiana Pescu, one of our award recipients, exemplifies love in action. Georgiana is a watchdog who defends the dignity of Romanians whose voices cannot be heard. She fearlessly enters facilities designated as care centers to rescue people with disabilities who are unwittingly held captive. In fact, Georgiana usually shows up unannounced and discovers the unimaginable. Helpless adults and children bound, sedated, starving, and in extreme cases dying. Thanks to Georgiana's brave work, dozens of offenders have been charged with human trafficking, exploitation, and even organized crime. We are honored to join an exceptional assembly of brave women who have shown their love and refuse to let fear or hardship define them. Their collective achievements and dedication move us all. Let us also take a moment to acknowledge those who persist in their struggles. For each of them, love serves as a powerful catalyst, instilling in a profound sense of purpose in their endeavors.
First Lady Melania Trump at the State Department in Washington at the International Women of Courage Awards presented by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Again, from the Fox News article, the award is in its 19th year and recognizes women from around the world who have demonstrated exceptional courage, strength, and leadership, often at great personal risk and sacrifice. The State Department said that since 2007, it has recognized more than 200 women from more than 90 countries with the International Women of Courage Award. U.S. diplomatic missions overseas nominate one woman of courage from their respective host countries, and finalists are selected and approved by senior department officials. Again, from Fox News. The House Oversight Committee's task force on the declassification of federal secrets held a hearing today following the recent release of former President John F. Kennedy's assassination documents. Oliver Stone was one of the witnesses. The filmmaker directed the 1991 movie JFK, which included the theory that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone in murdering the president. In 1963, Oliver Stone called for a reopening of the case.
I asked the committee to reopen what the Warren Commission failed miserably to complete. I ask you in good faith, outside all political considerations, to reinvestigate the assassination of this President Kennedy from the scene of the crime to the courtroom, which never happened, but which means the chain of custody on the rifle, the bullets, the fingerprints, the autopsy that defies belief, and that if it were a murder, we'd have given to the poorest man dying in a gutter. Let us reinvestigate the fingerprints of intelligence all over Lee Harvey Oswald from 1959 to 1960, his violent death in 1963. And most importantly, this CIA, whose muddy footprints are all over this case, a true interrogation. James Angleton, before he died, who was one of the original members of the CIA, was talking about Dulles and Helms and the others, what he called the Grand Masters. And he's a Catholic. Angleton was a Catholic, in search perhaps of repentance before his death. He did say, quote, if you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you had to believe would deservedly end up in hell. I guess I will see them soon. This is our democracy. This is our presidency. It belongs to us. Treat us with respect.
Filmmaker Oliver Stone, part of his opening statement before the U.S. House Oversight Committee's task force on the declassification of federal secrets. Another witness today, author and independent journalist Jefferson Morley, who said it's a grave matter to assert CIA officers were culpable or complicit in the death of President Kennedy. Congressman Robert Garcia of California, the task force ranking Democrat, asked him about that.
Mr. Morley, I know you didn't say this explicitly in your testimony. I just want to clarify. I think it's good for the record. Now, we know that your research, of course, is very focused on what the U.S. government knew about Lee Harvey Oswald. I think you made that also very clear. You believe Lee Harvey Oswald fired the shots who killed President Kennedy. Is that correct, sir?
He was not solely responsible for the president's...
The microphone.
No, I don't believe that President Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy. I don't think the evidence supports that.
You don't think the evidence supports that he fired the shots?
He might have fired a gun. He was not the intellectual author of the president's death.
Okay, and I wanted to clarify, because I think the firing of the shots, I just wanted to clarify that you do believe that he fired the shots.
No, I don't.
Okay.
That has not been determined by the evidence.
Okay. Well, I want to just get you to clarify that. Now, I want to also just say a few points. You, Mr. Morley, you have said that the CIA was not forthcoming with Congress in past investigations. Correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. I know you have said that you also you have said that CIA counterintelligence was also either new information or could have been responsible in some sort of broader plot. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
Okay. But you have said, I think, just to correct what you said, you have said, though, that there is no direct evidence as of today that the CIA committed the assassination. Is that correct?
I would say that the fact pattern that has emerged in last month shows culpability or complicity in the president's death.
But no direct evidence. Is that correct, sir?
We have very direct evidence of the CIA's surveillance of Oswald.
No, I'm not asking about that. I agree with you, sir. I mean direct evidence that the CIA is connected to the assassination.
All of these events connect the CIA to the assassination.
And I understand that, sir. I'm just telling you my interpretation of what's been presented is that I have not seen direct evidence. I'm not saying, by the way, that there haven't been, that the CIA or the FBI haven't been involved in a variety of covering up information in the past. We know that to be true, but I just want to make sure that I'm very clear that I have not seen direct evidence yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congressman Robert Garcia of California, ranking Democrat on the House Oversight and Reform Committee's task force on the declassification of federal secrets. Today's hearing was the task force's first. Question to author and independent journalist Jefferson Morley testifying. You can find the full hearing at our video library at cspan.org. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. That's cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.